Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. Today, we are going to look at wrong doors. We're looking at the church of Philadelphia. Jesus opened up doors for them. But we also see inside of life, not every door that is open is necessarily God opened that door for you. I want to read our text, Revelation 3, verse 7. To the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, these things says he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts what no one opens. I know your works. See, I've set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. Now, keep in mind, not every door that comes your way is opened by God. I am presented with more opportunities than I have time to take. And I know this, God will not give me more opportunities that he holds me accountable to do than I had time to do it. That wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't be reasonable, and that's not how God works. So just by logic, I have to go. Not every door that came to me was a God door. So it's discerning, how do I know which ones to take? So we really need to just be analyzing the doors to go, is this a God opportunity or just some good opportunity? So in life, I just kind of live by the rule of this. I should say no more than I say yes, because it's not saying yes to everything. It's saying yes to the right things. But when I say yes to one thing, I'm automatically having to say no to something else. And I meet people all the time in church. Oh, Pastor, man, that was a great message. I'm volunteering. I can't wait to get involved someday. I'm like, great. When are you doing that? Well, I don't really have time right now. Well, here's what I know. If you don't have time to do what God said is most important, here's why. You said yes to the wrong thing, and now you're having to say no to the right thing. Because if you're saying no to opportunities that God didn't bring your way, ultimately you're going to miss out and have to say no to the opportunities God is bringing you because you're overextended, you're overstretched. It happens with people and their finances all the time. Yes, I want that, and yes, I want that. Then when the thing they need comes along, they can't say yes to that. They have to say no to that because they got nothing left because they said yes to a bunch of wrong things. And so it's being discerning to say yes to the right things, and don't be afraid to say no. Now, people go, well, that's not very Jesus-like. What are you talking about? Jesus said no to all kinds of things. Jesus, tell my brother to divide my inheritance, my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And he goes, who made me an arbitrator over you? Jesus didn't ansser everybody's question. Jesus didn't do everything that he wanted. He did what the Father wanted. And he came to the end of his life. He said, I finished what you gave me to do. I must be about my Father's business. Jesus understood his musts and he understood his must nots. Now, Satan will often send his best before God sends his. When you unpack the temptation that Jesus had in the wilderness, if you really look at it, Satan was sending his best before God sent his. So Jesus had fasted 40 days. After 40 days, he's hungry. So what does Satan do? He brings his best. Hey, take these stones, turn them into bread. Well, that's Satan trying to get Jesus in his own strength and his own energy to fulfill his need. Now, he had a need for food, but Satan brought his best. Well, later God would feed him and God would take care of him. But Satan brought his temptation first. Satan said, hey, prove your identity. Jump off this temple. Prove to everybody that you're the Son of God. Well, that was Satan's best offer on how to prove his identity. Well, the Father would later validate the identity of Jesus. Later, the Father would take care of doing that. Jesus trusted his Father rather than falling to prey to Satan's best. And then Satan said, hey, worship me. I'll give you all this. And Jesus said, I'll worship the Lord my God and serve him only. And so he goes, I'm not going to buy into that. Why? He knew eventually God would give it to him at the right day and the right time. And so what we do see here is Satan kind of throwing something in front of Jesus that was a legitimate need. All three of those are legitimate. But he trusted that the Father's way and the Father's time would be best. But notice this, Satan brought his first, and then God ultimately brought his. And so just keep in mind, Satan can often send his best first. I've shared the story before. I'll share it again. I was associate youth pastor at a great church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, under Pastor Willie George. We had a thriving youth ministry that really he helped pioneer called 180. We were growing, and we were reaching 2,000 kids probably at this point every single week. And the largest church in the country at that time approached me and said, "Hey, Eric, we've been studying you. We listened to all your leadership stuff, and we want you to be our youth pastor over this church." And now I'm pretty flattered. The largest church in the country, that pastor's on television. He's a worldwide household name. And so that's a pretty flattering honor. And I just, in my heart, I just knew I wasn't done where I was at. I knew God hadn't released me from that church. I loved what I was doing. I loved the pastor I was serving, and I felt that I was called to be there for a longer season, and I wasn't finished. So I just told him, "Hey, thank you. I'm flattered, and but I'm not released from here." And so they called me back a couple weeks later. "Hey, man, we really think you're the guy." "Well, thanks. I appreciate it." Called me back again. "Hey, we really think you're the guy." 3 times I said no. So then they called me back and go, "Hey, why don't you just come out and do some leadership training for us?" I go, "Okay, I'll do that, but you can't offer me a job." And so, oh yeah. So I get there and they offer me a job. Now, they were more tactful in how they did it. They didn't just straight up violate their promise. They were much more tactful on that. But so anyway, I come back and I'm presented with this pretty impressive offer from this most influential church really at that time, still very famous, influential church. And so I get a job offer from them. I get a financial offer that was nearly double what I was making where I was at. I'd get to be the guy. I'd get to preach on the platform of this television, church. And I mean, so I go to some friends and I go, "Hey, what do you think?" Well, they all told me, "You're an idiot if you don't do this." They literally go, "You're an idiot. I mean, this is a door. You need to walk through it." And so I talked to the leader that I was serving at that time, and I shared the opportunity. And they said, "Hey, I really need you. The church needs you. It wouldn't be good for the church if you left right now. Here's why." We were in a large capital campaign, building our new $8 million youth center at the time. And they're like, "Hey, it just wouldn't be good." And so I said, okay. And he actually taught me this principle. He said this to me. He said, "Satan will often bring his best before God brings his." And so you just pray about it. And so I went back to the Lord, and he directed me to a verse in Proverbs. The Holy Spirit just brought a verse to my mind. "The integrity of the upright will guide them." And so here's what I knew. It wasn't integrity for me to leave this church at this time with what I had been entrusted and the role that I carried in that church. It just wouldn't have been right for that church. And I know this, God never hurts one church to bless another church. That's not how Jesus works. A blessing for one would be a blessing for the other. And so I just knew in my heart I wasn't done and I wasn't released. I called him back, told him, said, "Thank you, but I'm not released here." And I'll be honest, man, I cried literally when I hung up that phone because I was turning down what everybody told me is a door, an opportunity of a lifetime. And so I did that. Well, it was just a couple months later, I get called into Pastor George's office. He goes, "Hey, Doc, I heard so-and-so offered you a job." I said, "Yes, sir." "And you turned him down?" And I go, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Because I love where I'm at, and Jesus isn't done with me here, and I'm called to be here, and I'm here to serve." He goes, "Well, all right." He goes, "What'd they offer you?" So he told me, and he goes, "All right, I'll pay you that." And then, and I'm not telling you that to go work out a deal with your boss to do that. All right, I just got blessed. But then what was interesting is he goes, "Hey, your senior leader, I'm moving him to another part of the church. I need him to be over here on this, team. And so I'm moving him, and I want to give you the youth ministry." And up to that point, I thought I was going to be the associate for like the next 7 years. And it was just like overnight, because I said no to that door that was open. God opened up what was really in my heart, and that was to be able to lead at a higher level, have more responsibility. And then in the next 2 years, I was the senior leader of that youth ministry. I learned more in that 2 years than I had in the 12 years prior to that about what God wanted to do eventually for us when we launched a church called Element. God really formed and crystallized that vision inside of my heart. And I would have missed it had I walked through a door that was a good door, but not the God door, and I would have missed it. And I'm so grateful that I was able to discern a God door versus just a good door. And again, that was a great church, but God didn't have that for me, and I'm just so glad I didn't just follow opportunity. Don't follow opportunity, you follow God, and you'll never regret it. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out further. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at eriklawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.